Good afternoon, dear friends. Today we will talk about the most famous bribe takers of all time, and this is not one of the Chinese, as you might think, although they certainly stole and steal in a black way. Meet Harpal, a friend and playmate of Alexander the Great and the treasurer of the Great Army. And judging by the ratio of the amount stolen by him to the state budget of a country, like Athens, is a city-state that represented a significant part of ancient Greece. Harpalus is certainly the most prominent embezzlers of all their time. He came from a noble Macedonian family, which automatically allowed him to enter the circle of Alexander's close friends. Although he was physically deformed and because of his deformity could not serve in the army, he was not distinguished by his beauty or eloquence, but he could count well. And there was probably something in him for which the great Alexander honored him with his sincere and devoted friendship. In any case, it was in favor of Alexander Harpal that he acted when the prince, who was still very young and did not understand his place in life very well, decided to show his character and ask his daddy for his hand in marriage. The daughters of the Persian satrap are brown, which Philip got terribly angry about, and then he read his son. He said that, "You should get involved with this Asian girl when you have such a fate ahead of you." But Phil was simply exiled from the country by friends involved in the story of the failed trial. Edgar fell for several years, left Macedonia when Alexander came to power. Harpal appeared in the circle of his closest friends, and went on an Asian campaign with him, being a cripple. He could not participate in military operations, but Alexander entrusted him with the management of the military cars. And that's how gold often has a bad effect on a person. It blinds and captures the human soul. Edgar fell shaking like a scab over Alexander's gold. He was afraid that Darius the Persian, with his countless troops, would undoubtedly win before the Battle of Issus. He fled with the military treasury and ran to Greece. On the advice of a certain Vriska, they went to drink, and Perun Harpal did not get there, but settled down near Athens in the town of Megara, where he sowed on a large scale and full of what is called pleasure, buying food, drinks, and corrupt women. It was then that Harpal realized that a large amount of money could bring him far from being handsome, in the opinion of the ancient Greeks, who most appreciated the physical beauty and perfection of man. Alexander was simply distinguished by the love of the most beautiful women of Athens, by generosity of character and good-naturedness. Although he was terribly short-tempered and by the end of his life he was openly cruel, but he truly loved and forgave his friends. Harpal forgave, because a great victory was won at Isito. It seemed like a mere trifle compared to what was captured from the Persian king Darius. He not only forgave, but he also returned his position to him, appointing him military treasurer again, and went on to conquer the East. Harpal already remained with the satrap of Babylon and the keeper of the captured treasures, because it was in Babylon that Alexander ordered other loot from Ejboten, as well as from Persepolis and from the capitals of the Persian kingdom taken by his army. The treasure there was truly fabulous, and so far the king, he fought somewhere far away, on the edge of the Ecumene. Harpal decided that Alexander would certainly not return from this campaign, and began to run both hands up to his elbows into the emperor after losing money for food, booze, and Babylonian halls. He soon tired of it, and he himself wrote from Greece's most expensive and famous Hatera, the mutual fund on Nick provided her the real royal life and luxury of the mind-blowing, and even say married her and had lived from her daughter, but Bibione to not issued riotous living and gluttony and died. And then not inconsolable Garthol the king's money gave her to the monument. Over 200 talents one Babylon and the other in Athens monuments, and did that noise. We've heard several messages at once how it was perceived by the ancient Greek historian name Pump. In a letter to Alexander the Great wrote about it this way: imagine the eyes, and say something about writing from Babylon as Harpal's last journey to Fiona Q. She was a slave flutist, kickboxing and barkey to the coat synop, and having your prodigal craft from single to Athens, so it was like with 3 times, and 3 times the harlot, and now 200 talents he gave her to monuments, and all only marvel fact, that the one who fell for your great power and freedom, all we haven't decorated the grave, not Harpalini, one of the governors, and the heter of the mutual fund Anika. Long ago are 2 monuments in Athens and Babylon, but everyone knew that it was common available, 2 all wishing for common charge. And here, I Paralimini myself your friend will change to erect a temple to the lighted areas, and assign this temple and the altar of Aphrodite the mutual fund about Nick despising of God carer, and defile you received from the blessings. Actually wrote travelers near Athens guardianship Garsex was erected a giant statue. So wrote Wilde, architect in his essay on descent, which background you are a traveler closer to the Finns. In their sacred way of Alexina staying there for the first time can be seen from afar, and deal and luggage storage. He appeared alone at the gates of Athens in the clothes of a penitent sinner without mercenaries, and asked to be allowed into the city as a citizen. But of course the excuse was simple, because he did not come as a fugitive. He was a citizen, so please let him go on foot. And Demosthenes, the last paladin of Greek freedom, who at first Yara opposed even negotiations with Harpal, he received a bribe of 20 talents, changed his mind and offered the city to protect its citizen and at least provide shelter. Harpalus arrived in Athens and a real epic broke out. Bribery spent for 100 talents. Gar fell at the mercy of various prominent men of the most illustrious Athenian democracy, and when the National Assembly met to decide the fate of this man, because make tribute, unnaturally demanded the extradition of the fugitive and the embezzler. On Antipater's orders, the Macedonian ambassador arrived in the city and announced that he wanted to take away with him, as a prisoner, a disobedient and rebel against Tsar Alexander. The meeting went awry, and although honest citizens of Athens, such as Phaeaci, he was incorruptible, categorically insisted that Athens should not tarnish its name by communicating where did they go. So the fact is that Harpal, who already knows that he will be arrested, remained at large, spent the whole night distributing bribes to prepare his escape, and in fact very soon his well-wishers organized his escape from prison, and he left Athens. A terrible scandal broke out in Athens. There was a whole bribery trial, and many prominent Athenian politicians were convicted of bribery in this trial, including your mob Demot and, importantly, the light of democracy and the example of preschoolers, Dimas Fen, who was convicted of taking at least 20 talents. It is generally believed that he stole 350 half, but only 20 proved that he was sentenced to a fine of 50 talents. Greedy Demosthenes to pay, he refused and was thrown into prison. He soon fled from there and went into exile, but as for Karpov, his fate was sad. The big money did not help him. The mercenaries he recruited regarded him simply as a money bag, and when he found himself on the island of Crete, the Spartan commander of these mercenaries called Phoebe, he decided that he would need both the mercenaries and, most importantly, the money of the general himself to seize power in Crete. Egapola killed an outstanding bribe taker, and the story ended like this, my dear ones. And you say Menshikov stole the annual budget of the Russian Empire. Just think. The annual budget of some kind in the Russian Empire. Garpa stole an amount 4 times greater than the annual budget of the powerful Athenian stateries called Phoebe. He decided that he would need both the mercenaries and, most importantly, the money of the general himself to seize power in Crete. Egapola killed an outstanding bribe taker, and the story ended like this, my dear ones. And you say Menshikov stole the annual budget of the Russian Empire. Just think. The annual budget of some kind in the Russian Empire. Garpa stole an amount 4 times greater than the annual budget of the powerful Athenian state.